Hi, welcome. If you're new here, my name is Joanna, and today I'll be reviewing Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This book comes highly recommended from Alan at the Library of Alexandria. He has a wonderful spoiler-free review on his channel, which is very thorough. So I will go ahead and link it down below. I'll be also offering a spoiler-free review with just some of my own thoughts and opinions on the book. And I buddy read this book with Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads. I will link his channel down below. He had some wonderful thoughts and insights on this book. So this book is a flintlock fantasy standalone. And so it takes place in the late 1770s, kind of around the French Revolution time. And although it is fantasy, it is not in our world. It feels very much like historical fiction. We do deal with guns, and there is a little bit of magic, but it's not quite focused heavily on the magic in this book. So this book is about two neighboring kingdoms, the kingdom of Liscon and the kingdom of Denland. Both have monarchies until one day some revolutionaries commit regicide in the kingdom of Denland and kill the king, and this threatens the kingdom of Liscon, which wants to remain a monarchy. So they go to war with each other. And in this story, we follow the character of Emily Marshwick, who lives in Liscon. And so Emily is a noblewoman for the most part. Her family is upper class, but you do see how the war has really devastated the whole entire kingdom of Liscon. So her family is even struggling to kind of make ends meet, even though they're doing better than other people. In Emily's family, she is left with just her siblings because her parents are no longer with them. Her mother died previous to the book starting, and her father died by suicide. And so she is living there with her older sister, Mary, who takes on kind of the maternal role because she has a younger child, but also because she kind of looks into the family's well-being, seeing where their next meal is going to come from, that kind of thing. Emily also has a younger sister named Alice, who is kind of superficially minded, more preoccupied with boys and looks and dresses and that kind of thing. And so Emily, the middle child, takes on a more paternal role. And this is especially true when her brother Roderick is drafted for the war. And she goes to the mayor governor's office, Mr. Northway. She has a very tense relationship with this mayor governor. They see him as kind of like a villain in this family because he had a very tense relationship with their father, and they think that maybe is what drove their father to die by suicide, to make that decision. And I forgot to mention, by the way, there are a couple of servants there in the household as well. Emily goes to Mr. Northway to see if there's some way to get her brother out of having to go to war. Her brother-in-law gets drafted as well, Mary's husband. And she has no luck. It's a very tense relationship that you see develop throughout this book. And we learn early on that Emily somehow becomes a soldier in this war. We learn that as early as chapter 1. I will not give away what leads to that happening because I thought it was really interesting to read this book and find out for myself. So I'm going to keep this super spoiler free. But it is really interesting to see how it comes about that she ends up fighting in the war. I will also have to say that it does show aspects of Emily's character as well, which are very interesting. So the thing I like, though, about the beginning of the book is that you see the home life in Gremaine, this household where Emily grows up, and her relationship with her sisters. And with her sister Alice being very superficially minded, it brings out a lot of Emily's sarcasm and sort of her hard-headedness, her level-headedness about things. So I thought that was really well established in the beginning of the book. And as we go into the war scenes, it totally changes. We get immersed in this swamp setting for the battle scenes, and Tchaikovsky does such a fantastic job creating the very gross, visceral feel of the swamp with the creatures and the snakes and just the mugginess of the atmosphere. So excellent job with the settings here. And of course, we get wonderful side characters in this book with the camaraderie between soldiers. Emily finds some like-minded friends, things like that. So it's a very interesting read from that perspective. And so Emily being in the war, being a soldier, you could see that there is a little bit of commentary on women in military, But a bigger part of this book is actually the clash between class and military, which you see when a monarchy has rule over a military. It's very interesting to see how that plays out. I will say that Tchaikovsky's prose is very accessible. It feels like it's appropriate to that time period. And at the same time, it doesn't ever feel heavy. It flows very easily. This isn't the type of book where you'll find a bunch of passages that you'll just want to quote or highlight. At least it wasn't for me, but I find it accessible enough that I think it will appeal to a lot of readers. And I found that the plot was very, very good in this book. I was very fascinated to see the way that Tchaikovsky wrapped up all the plot threads at the end in such a satisfying way. I left this book very, very satisfied. But I do have to admit that leading up to the end, I did have not quite a struggle with the book, but I did feel a little bit of distance from the main protagonist, Emily. And the reason why is because Emily is a very likable character. She's very dutiful. She is very responsible. She's always thinking beyond herself. She's always doing her duty. And at the same time, I never felt deeply attached to her humanity, her insecurities, her faults, those kinds of things. I just saw her as always kind of doing what's right, even though, of course, she gets tested at times and she knows how to stand up for herself. She has a bit of humor, as I mentioned earlier, with her sister Alice. So you see things like that come out, but she's not a woman of many words. In a way, she kind of reminds me a little bit of Vin from Mistborn for that reason, but she is likable. I did care about her, but I did feel, like I said, a little detached from her as I was reading. And maybe just because I like more dramatic characters, I have a little more of a flair for the dramatic. But it did fit this type of story. I know Alan has compared this to Downton Abbey and possibly Jane Austen books. So I think that maybe is why it's a little more subtle in tone. So it's kind of like if you're someone like me who prefers more jewel-toned palette, when you're given something that's exquisite in its neutral tones, it might be something you can appreciate, but it might not be your go-to preference, if that makes any sense. So that was something that I felt while I was reading it. I just felt a little bit distanced from the character of Emily until the end. And then I felt like more layers of her story really came forward for me. And I will say there is a little bit of a romance in this book and a little bit of, dare I say, love triangle. I know some people will argue with me about this because one person already did and said that was not how he saw it. But when you have somebody who's trying to make a decision between two different love interests, that's how I interpret a love triangle, but maybe I'm wrong. And you can argue with me in the comments if you disagree with that idea. It didn't bother me, though. I thought it was really well done. It's not the focus of this story by any means, but it is there. And it kind of highlights and brings out some deeper themes in this book. So some huge themes in this book include loyalty, especially our relationship with loyalty, questioning loyalty, as well as propaganda and winning a war. At what point is surrender the more noble decision? At what point do you lose sight of your humanity when you go so far in trying to win a war? And at what point can you no longer go back to the person you once were after serving as a soldier for so long? So these are all kind of questions that come up, and I already mentioned the clash between class and military, which comes up too. So this was a very interesting story from all those perspectives. So I will say that if you're someone who's not really into military fantasy, this might not be for you. There are some fantasy elements, but this really feels much more historical fiction, like I said. And so I think that just about wraps up my thoughts on this book. Like I said, I was very satisfied with how this ended. Now, Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads, he predicted the ending. I wasn't able to predict the ending, but he actually accurately predicted the ending probably a couple of 100 pages before getting to the end. And I was very impressed with that. So you might be able to predict the end, but he was even still very satisfied with how this wrapped up. I would encourage you to read it if anything I shared sounds interesting to you. And for me, this was a little bit between a 4 and a 5-star read for rating purposes because of just how distanced I kind of felt. And this was no fault of the book. Again, I think it's just the aesthetic of the book. and me having more of a taste for more dramatic characters. So I hope that's helpful. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you're interested in picking this up, or if you have read this, I'd love to hear from you. Just be sensitive to spoilers and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.